Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you.
And I'm also delighted to welcome Charlotte. I last saw her when she was talking at the Broadcasting Press Guild last month about television. Today she's concentrating on radio. She was appointed as the BBC's Chief Content Officer in September 2020, and at that stage she joined the BBC board. She's the creative lead. She sets the strategy for BBC Television, Network Radio, BBC iPlayer and BBC Sounds across all the key genre and platforms, and she ensures that they reflect the diversity, or attempts to assure they reflect the diversity of the BBC's audience. She's responsible for commissioning for all BBC network television channels and iPlayer, radio commissioning and production for the national radio networks and BBC Sounds, but not for local radio, and I make that point now, multi-platform commissioning and production for children's and education, the BBC proms and orchestras and choirs, so we will get onto that. And she was previously in various senior roles in broadcasting, not least controller of BBC One, which used to be a very important job, but in the new world no longer is. She joined the BBC in 2006 from the commercial broadcasters where she was doing documentaries. She's off, as I say, to Liverpool. I hope you'll get a chance to see Steve Rosenberg and that he will give you his, you will ask him for your favourite Eurovision track. I think we probably all heard quite enough of Steve Rosenberg yesterday on all of the various outlets. Today, as I say, she's speaking about radio and audio. Please, a warm welcome to Charlotte Moore.
Thanks very much, Karen. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. I'd like to begin by saying thank you to Colin and to all VLV members for giving me this opportunity to speak today. But I also want to thank you, as ever, for all your support and what I think, today, listening to this morning, I think it's really constructive contribution to the debate that, of course, always swells around the BBC. It has been, I think it's fair to say, a roller coaster of a few months. Whether it's Twitter storms or our transformation plans, the strength of opinion is always a reminder of just how much people care about the BBC and our public service mission, and how deeply stitched we are into the fabric of British national life. We're acutely aware that it's our audience who owns the BBC. It's a huge responsibility, and it's one that I and we try to rise to each and every day. So we're incredibly grateful for all the work that you do to support us and keep us on track. Now, nothing is perhaps more core to the BBC's mission than bringing the country together for shared national moments. So I have to start by looking back to over the last week to the incredible coronation celebration. More than 25 million people tuned in to watch the BBC's live coverage on Saturday. Over 10 million watched the coronation concert on Sunday. Many more listened to our excellent radio coverage. And Radio 3 saw an incredible listener boost on BBC Sounds of over 60% on the previous Saturday, with a huge spike for Katie Derham's coronation music special. It was an unforgettable weekend, and I have to pay tribute to the hard work and dedication and creativity of all of our BBC teams. When we think back to the coronation of Queen Elizabeth II nearly 70 years ago, I think it's worth remembering that it was that event more than anything else that transformed television into a mainstream medium. It marked a major technological shift. More than 20 million people watched on TV, outnumbering the radio audience for the first time. And it's an important reminder that innovation and the BBC's public service mission have always gone hand in hand. In fact, the BBC's incredible success over the last 100 years has been built on not getting stuck in the past, but being brave enough to adapt our mission to changing times and technologies. So I'm proud of the way we helped audiences celebrate the coronation across every part of the BBC. From seamless live coverage on TV, radio and online, to celebrations on shows like The One Show and EastEnders, The Archers, Desert Island Discs, to specially commissioned documentaries on iPlayer and on podcasts on Sounds. Now it's Eurovision's turn to take centre stage as our second massive live national event in a week. And I think it's just another chance for the BBC to bring the whole country together, and another chance to reach different audiences by pulling out all the stops across all of our platforms. These events are great examples of how the BBC has changed in recent years, exploiting all the possibilities of online to enhance what we offer and have even more of an impact at the big national moments. It also shows, I think, just how much we can do for audiences now that radio and TV are under single leadership for the first time. Since taking on the role a couple of years ago, I've really loved working with my hugely talented senior team. And because we're now all one team, we've been able to change the way we think about and commission our content. We don't commission for one slot anymore in radio or the TV schedules on any given day or night. Instead, we think about the lifetime of every programme we make, how we offer content to people at different times in different ways, and how we move listeners and viewers seamlessly through the BBC's portfolio of stations, channels and services to choose what they watch and listen to from a vast range. But it's our radio in particular that I want to focus on today. Look across our schedules this morning, and you'll see an extraordinary commitment to the best programmes in the strongest Grecian tradition of inform, educate and entertain, from Today and In Our Time to Woman's Hour and Crossing Continents, to essential classics and Composer of the Week. You'll also find a range of breakfast shows that continue to be best in class, all of which are delivering strongly on our goal of holding up the reach of our stations, and all of which are driving them closer to their target audiences. We're really proud, for example, that Radio 2 is still consistently reaching around 14 million listeners a week. Despite all the competition in the audio market, despite all the new stations that have launched, Radio 2 is still the largest radio station in the UK. It's always been a station for everyone over 35. It's absolutely delivering for that target age group, with its talented presenters from Tony Blackburn, Joe Wiley and Paul Gambaccini to Steve Wright, Sarah Cox and Scott Mills. And in the last few weeks, we've heard everything from Radio 2's Coronation Collection to a special collaboration of Queen, the band. From Liza Tarbuck's Let It Grow planting initiative to Cerys Matthews' exclusive interview with Van Morrison for the Blues Show. And from next Monday, of course, we'll have the fabulous Vernon Kay with his new mid-morning show. Meanwhile, last week, Radio 5 Live won 3 of the BBC's 18 golds at the Audio and Radio Industry Awards, including Best Speech Breakfast Show for 5 Live Breakfast. For Radio 4, it was an incredible 7 golds, including Station of the Year. The fact Radio 4 won awards across the full range of genres, from current affairs and factual to drama, comedy and audiobooks, I think it's proof of the editorial quality and the ambition that we've seen under Mohit Bakaya's brilliant leadership. It also shows that where we have been making changes, it's been with the interests and the needs of our audiences in mind. The schedule is still the heartbeat of daily life for 10 million listeners as they tune in live every week. From Prayer for the Day to the Midnight News, with a wealth of our other programmes in between. I don't think there's anything like it anywhere. And you only have to look at the weekend schedule to see that our radio drama is on top form. Turning Point on Saturdays, focusing on important moments in history. Anna Karenina on Sundays, part of a special season exploring the themes of love, all introduced by John Yorke's brilliant opening lines. On-demand listening is growing fast, but our commitment to live schedules that are filled with programmes that are loved by our audiences, fronted by big names and highlighting the editorial ambition that we're known for worldwide, that really is unwavering. Just take 2 new commissions for an example, which I'm pleased to say you're the first to hear about. The first is a partnership with the National Portrait Gallery to mark its reopening this summer. Martha Kearney will bring 10 British figures from Arlo Parks to Sir Paul Smith, face to face, with portraits they've chosen from the collection to talk about what they really mean to them personally. And then Mary Beard is back to recreate the lives of 6 figures from the world of ancient Rome and unearth some of their untold stories in being Roman. So any sense that the work we're doing with BBC Sounds and our on-demand offer is somehow at the expense of our core commitment to live radio quite simply doesn't stack up. In fact, I would argue the opposite is the case. Just as with our coronation coverage, the possibilities of online represent a great creative opportunity to take that core radio commitment and make it go further. When the great Barry Humphries died a few weeks ago, for example, we know that BBC listeners were keen to re-engage with some of his work. Within hours, we were able to make it available on Sounds, a selection of programmes from his hugely popular Radio 2 series, Forgotten Music Masterpieces, plus appearances on shows like Loose Ends and Desert Island Discs. It all adds to that ability to bring listeners a deeper and richer audio offer across our stations and online. This is the big, exciting opportunity that Jonathan Wall is focusing on as director of BBC Sounds. Not only does Sounds allow listeners to carry their favourite breakfast show with them seamlessly, from the house to walking the dog to the car journey to work, it also gives them the option of listening to Today and Zoe Ball and Nikki Campbell and Petrock Trelawney. It's interesting that our biggest live shows are actually our biggest on-demand hits on Sounds, like The Archers and Desert Island Discs. And it's also true that our most popular podcasts are firmly in the best traditions of BBC Radio. Newscast is consistently one of our top performers. Programmes like Ukrainecast, Putin and The Coming Storm are bringing audiences the most important stories from around the world, all deeply rooted in our heritage of brilliant investigative journalism. Sliced Bread is a big hit, firmly in the consumer affairs tradition of You and Yours. And that's one that's made the journey from podcast into the Radio 4 schedule. So it's a brilliant virtuous circle. All of the schedules available to more people for longer. The best podcast ideas enhancing the schedules. It means more choice and more value to all audiences for the licence fee. And the same care and commitment to public service quality that we put into curating our schedules also goes into putting together our on-demand offer. Because as well as serving our existing listeners with even more, Sounds is our chance to reach a whole new audience who are new to audio and who might not have the existing relationship with radio or the emotional connection to the BBC. And we know there's more interest in high-quality podcasts than ever before, from audiences but also from the global audio market. And at the BBC, we want to capitalise on both those opportunities. We want to make sure we're at the forefront when it comes to developing the best creative ideas, working with the best talent, and creating more great British IP. Ultimately, it's about delivering maximum value for the licence fee payer and the audio ecosystem in the UK. So I'm delighted to tell you about two new podcasts that we have coming up. History's Secret Heroes with Helena Bonham Carter, who tells the extraordinary stories of some of the Second World War's most fascinating unsung heroes. And then Kirsty Young, fresh from her coronation duties, returning with her first podcast series for BBC Sounds and Radio 4. She'll be interviewing some of our most prominent public figures and asking what would they want to tell their younger selves. This is quintessentially BBC programming, and it shows how the way we now commission across both schedules and on demand not only helps us to expand the breadth and depth of our public service offer, but also its reach in an on-demand world. Our coverage of the proms is another great example of how online is allowing us to take our traditional mission even further. As ever, every prom at the Royal Albert Hall will be broadcast live on Radio 3. But for the first time, most of these concerts will then be available for audiences to enjoy on BBC Sounds, not just for a few days, but for a full year. I don't think there could be anything more squarely in line with our public service mission than extending the national and international reach of the world's biggest classical music festival. And that's before you get to the 24 proms we'll broadcast on BBC TV and iPlayer, where again they'll be available for 12 months. It has, of course, been a really difficult few months when it comes to the question of how the BBC supports classical music. But let me make it absolutely clear, the BBC and I are completely committed to being the UK's greatest champion for classical music. It's been a fundamental part of our role for over a century. And let's not lose sight of the fact that we remain the biggest commissioner of music in the country, as well as one of the biggest employers of musicians. And we're determined to keep that role safe. That means making sure our support for classical music is fit for the future and, importantly, financially sustainable. All of you are aware of the big picture here. The BBC has undergone a real terms reduction in our funding over the past 10 years of 30%. We're experiencing incredibly heavy financial pressures across every single part of the organisation. But we have to adapt, and we have to be open to new ways of doing things to secure our commitment to classical for the next 100 years. But as I've said to our performing groups, we have to make it work for everyone. We know just how much the BBC singers are loved across the classical community and how admired they are for their professionalism and quality. So we're really pleased that we've received approaches from a number of organisations offering alternative funding models. Now we're looking at those options, which, if viable, would secure the future of the ensemble. We're also listening carefully to the response we've had to our plans for fewer salaried posts in our English orchestras. And we're having really constructive conversations with the Musicians' Union and other BBC unions to explore the options. You all know that the BBC has gone through an extensive process with stakeholders and staff, the result of which was last year's Classical Music Review. It's a commitment to more collaboration with partners, more investment in music education. It's also a plan to do more to open up the classical music sector as a place to work and to be more innovative in bringing classical to new audiences. We'll keep listening and we'll keep talking to all our stakeholders. And I believe that with Sam Jackson as controller of Radio 3, Simon Webb as head of our orchestras and choirs, and David Pickard as director of the Proms, we could not have a more brilliant, expert and passionate team in place. They're testament to the fact that our commitment to classical music remains as strong as ever. And bringing the whole division together under the outstanding leadership of Lorna Clark as Director of Music means we have more opportunities to take classical music to different audiences in different parts of the BBC. Whether it's the BBC Concert Orchestra on Radio 2's Piano Room or classical music mixes on BBC Sounds. It's a tribute to how well the division is performing that our music station picked up 8 arias last week, including Gold Awards for Best Music Breakfast Show, Best Music Entertainment Show, and Best Specialist Music Show. And I'm delighted to say that we've already seen more interest than last year in this summer's prom season, with its ambitious and wide-ranging concerts, all of which go on sale this Saturday. There are 2 final points I want to make before I finish today. The first is about the growing shift we're seeing of audiences online. We know that broadcast services will remain essential for decades to come. Our stations and our channels reach millions of people every day, and we need to keep them strong. But for the BBC to thrive, we have to recognise that all audiences are moving decisively towards digital and an on-demand world. Online take-up is now growing fastest among audiences who have traditionally been the biggest users of live broadcast services. In the past 5 years, weekly podcast listening has more than doubled for those aged 35 to 54. It's more than tripled for those over 55. And in the last 3 years, the number of over 55s using the BBC's online services has grown by more than 20% to over 11 million. We have to stay ahead of this curve. It's fantastic that the BBC still has some of the biggest stations in the country, and our live listening is holding up incredibly well. But we can't stand still and not think about how we can catch every single licence fee payer and make sure that they get relevant, high-quality audio from the BBC. We want to make sure that BBC Radio remains relevant in everyone's lives and that everyone can access our content however and whenever they want. And that's why growing BBC Sounds is really important to us. And I'm so pleased that we're reaching record numbers. Sounds has gone from a standing start in 2019 to over 1.5 billion plays of radio music and podcasts last year, up by nearly a quarter. In fact, just last week, Sounds hit a new record for the 2nd week running, with live listening, strong stations at its heart, and an outstanding on-demand offer. It's a brilliant public service success story and one we should be proud of. And the final point I want to make is about the incredible talent that we have at the BBC. There's often a lot of talk about the BBC's talent drain, and I'm often asked if I'm worried about it. And the truth is, I think I'd be more worried if others stopped wanting to poach our people. Of course they're in demand. They're brilliant. They're the best in the business, both on and off air. And there will always be commercial opportunities for those who wish to pursue them. And it will always be the BBC's job to grow talent, to start careers, and to open up new opportunities in turn. In fact, it's because we don't have commercial imperatives, because we're here purely to serve audiences and not shareholders, that the BBC is able to take risks on new talent that others simply can't, and will always be willing to offer the creative freedom and time and space to pursue passion projects that even the most established names simply can't find elsewhere. So thank you again for the opportunity to speak here today. I hope it's helped highlight that at the BBC, radio's future is in safe hands. We have outstanding dedicated teams in every area and at every level of the organisation, across speech and music. And we have a passion to help innovate our radio industry for generations to come, so it can stay the very best in the world. The landscape may be changing fast, and we're adapting to stay relevant. But the BBC's commitment to high-quality public service radio remains the same. My goal is to preserve the very best audio tradition of the BBC and to make sure that all audiences can continue to benefit from it in the years ahead. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Charlotte. At the end of your speech, it sounded very much as though you were setting out the vision for the BBC that Tina has been asking for. When is that going to happen? Is that likely to happen soon?
Well, look, to be honest, I genuinely feel we've been setting out the BBC's strategic vision very clearly in the last couple of years. We've been very clear about our Value for All strategy, which really is about making sure that we have something every day, every week, every month, every year for audiences, for licence fee payers across the whole of the BBC to feel that they get value, that they simply can't get anywhere else. So that Value for All strategy, I think, is very clear. I think we've also been clear about, and I think Tina acknowledged this as well, that the need to move with audiences, to actually respond to the extraordinary changes that are going on in the on-demand world, we absolutely need to make sure that we are fit for that future, and not only looking after our live stations and our live channels, as I said, where there are still huge numbers of people who consume through those medium, but we also have to make sure that we are creating choice for audiences on our on-demand services. So we have to, our strategy is to prepare for that digital future that is already, we're all living it. I mean, just to say that, the number of people that are consuming on-demand in the older age groups, they are the fastest growing into on-demand services. So I think we're very clear about that. I think we're very clear about what are we here to do. We are here to make programmes and to make great radio, television and online for British audiences, in all the diversity of British audiences, wherever they might live in the UK. We have to make sure that they feel the BBC adds value to their lives and that they need us. It's not our sort of a God-given right to exist. We have to be sure that we are valued and needed and offering something that others can't in order for the Reithian tradition of inform, educate and entertain to be able to continue. And I genuinely believe we can play that role, whether it's bringing global stories to UK audiences or whether it's UK stories to UK audiences. So I feel very, very strongly about that. And I think the other thing we've been clear about is because of our financial challenges, which are very, very real, I think it's really important that we think about new models, new partnerships, just like we have in drama. We've managed to have extraordinary drama, I think, in the last few years on television, and it's shown the partnerships we've made with different commercial entities has been extremely advantageous to the BBC viewer. When I think about Blue Lights or Happy Valley or Sherwood, these shows would not have been able to exist if we hadn't partnered up and made sure that we had investment that came in, because we know inflation is going through the roof at the moment. So we have to have different models. So my commitment to public service broadcasting, anyone who knows me knows the kind of programmes that I have always wanted to commission. I am absolutely committed to that. But we have to be up for we have to be listening to audiences and make sure that we're adapting to keep up with these changing audience behaviours and what they expect. And that choice that is out there and that competition shouldn't be something we're fearful of. It should be something that we step into.
But how are you listening to audiences? One of the VLV's biggest criticisms is that you haven't been consulting enough, and yet when you did consult on classical music and produced a review, it ended up with this huge great backlash about the BBC singers. So what went wrong?
Look, we listen to audiences all the time. I mean, that is anyone who works in commissioning and anyone in my team. We spend all our time trying to work out Are we giving enough value? Who are we not giving value to? How can we increase that value? We respond to audience demand by our ever-evolving schedules across radio and television are constantly evolving to meet the changes in audience habits, the changes in audience interest, and we constantly look at the range and the mix of what we do. The Classical Music Review came out with some very, very clear proposals that we thought, recommendations that we absolutely all agreed with and were welcomed by everybody. In order to meet those, and again, I would say education is absolutely at the core of that. It's terrifying to me that 50% of state schools offer classical music education of any form. That is not going to grow a classical music audience of the future. So I have to look at the models that we are running with our classical music offer, and I have to think about how am I going to make sure that we reach more and more people all over the UK with classical music provision, both live and on demand and with real education. And it's one of the beauties of my role that I can think about what can we do in classical music that I can also make sure is a provision on bite size? How can I link radio and television up? How can I say, you know, we had a fantastic orchestral performance on the breakfast show the other day. We should have been that evening saying, listen, live on Radio 3, 6 o'clock tonight, there's another performance. We don't make those connections. And to be honest, taking audiences, people who love Radio 3, but then telling them where else they might find more on sounds is one of my jobs. Taking audiences on the one show where they heard the singers the other day to go online and to explore more is one of the great things the BBC can do. And we're trying to make more of the sum of our parts to make sure that licence fee payers really understand what classical music does for them. It's not just there for people who already love classical music. Our performing groups and our classical music offer has to be there to inspire a passion in the future audiences as well.
The critics of your decision on the singers claimed you just didn't realise how important that they were.
We
and
absolutely
you accidentally did it without
for
not very much money.
Listen, we looked into different models, and it's absolutely right that we have to do that. We have now, you know, it's fantastic that we're looking at what I hope will be very viable options. It's also really important that we partner with people across the UK. It's really important that we support choirs across the whole of the UK. It's really important that we have partnerships with different performing groups. It's really important that we think about how do our performing groups actually tell a story on our channels and on sounds and on our radio stations. So, to be honest, we've only got a certain amount of money. We have to look at different models, and that's what we're doing. We're having really constructive conversations, and I don't believe, unfortunately, that those things would have been on the table if we hadn't been through this process. So look, of course it's a difficult time for all of our staff, particularly for everyone in the performing groups, but to be honest, I would say there's great jeopardy for all of our staff at the BBC at the moment, and for anybody who works in public service broadcasting. We all know the competition is enormous. But it is for the BBC to have the courage to look at new models, to stand firm and to really think about the ways that we might be able to do things in the future to make sure that we do have a classical music offer of the future. If I didn't care, if I didn't think it was really important at the heart of our public service mission, then I would not have done that review, and I would not be putting it right at the heart of our future plans.
Now, I know you're not technically responsible for local and regional.
Well, not just technically. I'm not. But obviously,
but
I'm on the board.
You have an overview of the BBC, and many of the cuts, local radio, World Service, regional TV, England, are for the distinctively PSB type programming.
Well, in local radio, just to be clear, there's not a reduction in funding or in headcount overall. Again, it's the same story that I'm trying to, which I was talking about just now, which is we have to look at different ways of doing things to meet the on-demand future and the digital future. And again, you know, our live local stations will be part of a sounds future as well. All of our live stations are absolutely available on sounds, and in the future we know that more and more will be consumed. You can see the trends. So it's the same. What we're trying to do is look at the programming that we make, whether in local radio, whether in World Service, and how do we make the funds that we have meet that audience demand and that change in habit. So we have to divert resources to prepare for that future. That doesn't mean we're not committed to local radio and local journalism. We absolutely are.
But local radio serves an awful lot of people who
Yeah.
do not have broadband, older people, and the whole issue of the digital divide, which Tina Stoll says they're going to look at, that worries an awful lot of
Which
people.
is why, again, and I feel very, very strongly about this, it's why we have to keep our stations and our channels strong. We can't switch them off and just send everybody off to the digital world because not everyone will be able to get there. It's why BBC Three as a channel, we brought it back because we knew there are a lot of young people who still consume and they do not have broadband or other services in order to kind of consume that. So it's very, very important. We're not just trying to reach all audiences. It's not just universal in the programming we make, it's universal access as well. So we have to move in step with broadband, capacity. And that's very, very real, that.
I don't want to say I told you so, but many of us said it was mad to switch off BBC Three.
Well, look,
you reversed the decision to close Six Music.
I didn't, yeah.
I know this is before your time,
Yeah.
but the BBC somehow seems to make the wrong decisions.
Look, I think we made lots of right decisions. I don't accept I think we really do make a lot of right decisions. I think all of us, as you go into this brave new world, which we all have to feel our way. You have to iterate, you have to evolve. It's why sometimes, and I think Tina was saying, come on, give us the whole strategy, tell me what you're going to do and what you're not going to do. It's like, well, it doesn't quite work like that in the commissioning world, if I'm honest. You evolve, you learn, you see what audience is like. Somebody else said in the room, creative risk-taking. Yes, of course you do. Some things you do don't work. And you have to have the courage to pick yourself up and go, right, that didn't work. It's all about audience behaviour. It's all about listening to what audiences want and how they respond. And when things don't work, the great thing about the BBC, there isn't a commercial imperative for me, but I have to listen to the audiences. They're at the heart of every decision. And when we don't get things right, we think about that and we listen to what the audience is saying and we respond accordingly. But some of the changes we're making are because we can see where audience trends are going. So we have to respond to that as well.
I'm going to open it to the floor shortly, but you mentioned you don't have commercial imperatives, but you do have a need for money, and you're doing more commercial partnerships. And the VLV is worried that there'll be more commercial and less PSB.
Yeah, no, I can understand those concerns. But again, I think if you look at the BBC's track record, if you look at Wild Isles or Green Planet, these had fantastic, we had investment from other partners, but it absolutely did not change what we were making. They are core to our public service mission. Look at what studios make, whether it's Spring Watch, Autumn Watch, they make some fantastic programming that is absolutely core to that mission. We've had to make a very difficult decision there because we realised we looked at the audience figures and we went Autumn Watch did not have the figures that Spring Watch and Winter Watch. Rather than spreading ourselves thin, it's really important that we are creatively strong. So we made difficult decisions and I think that's the right decision with the money that we have. But I don't think you can question that just because you have investment or added investment or investment opportunity in some programmes, that means that you suddenly change your editorial. It's actually using opportunities to find investment to go on so that we can continue to be the creative force that we are. And I think if you look at the range of programming that we make across radio and television, religion, arts, science, history, nobody else services all those specialisms in the way that we do. Classical music, world music, pop music, jazz music. Nobody is interested in that broad range. And that is what, again, when Tina says, what is your mission? What's your strategy? My mission and strategy is to make sure that we continue to offer that mix of genre across radio, television and online into the future. Now, all of those genres have to evolve, but it's incredibly important that they offer that alongside news and local journalism.
VLV are worried that because there won't be the quotas and that the bill reduces the specific...
Do you know what? Look, quotas sometimes have held us back, if I'm honest. Some quotas, which are about hours on linear, are actually very difficult for us to, in a world where we're having to create enough choice on demand, we have to think about how do we balance that, don't we? So, to be honest, the quotas have to evolve with the future as well. I think I think it's incredibly important that people look at those quotas, and I don't mind being held to account for current affairs, for religion, for arts. It's core to our public service mission. But what I would say is let's not look at them in quite the same way as hours on linear all the time, because it's really important that we're able to, just like we are with the proms, make sure that those concerts are available for a year, not just on the night they were on. I mean, that's incredibly important. And I think what a fantastic offer, because what I'll be able to do with BBC4 is surface some of those and curate in different ways and allow people to then go and explore what's on iPlayer or on Sounds.
Lovely, thank you. Yes, any questions for Tina? We've got one in the middle here. Yeah, there, yeah. Not Tina.
Thanks. Hi, Charlotte. I'm Jack Gamble from the Campaign for the Arts. I just wanted to say, firstly, thank you very much for what you said today about classical music and for listening to the concerns that have been expressed about those changes in what I know is a very, very difficult funding climate for you. I think not everybody understands the connection between the BBC's funding of music groups and its more familiar broadcasting role. But as I know you know, content depends on content creators, and content creators depend on an ecology that supports creativity. The BBC, I think, is a beacon of creativity in this country, and I think it is a major reason why there is that deep care for the BBC that you spoke about in your speech. My question is really whether that care, which I think is absolutely right, is sufficiently represented in the kinds of conversations that we were having in the previous session about the BBC's role in the contemporary landscape. I understand why any future strategy for the BBC needs to be mindful of threats and competition from other services, but isn't the truth, putting this more in perspective, that over a month, 97% of UK adults use BBC services? I mean, that's nearly all adults in the country. And my question, therefore, is, are we at risk of not putting in sufficient perspective the fact that the BBC, more often than not, is fulfilling its public service remit and benefit to literally almost all UK adults? What is the problem we're trying to fix here?
Yeah, look, I think we can't be complacent about that. And I think it's all about, and I spend a lot of time looking at trends and trying to analyse how we meet the changes that are going on. So, I think it's really important not to be complacent. And I think it's really important to recognise that changing world and adapt to it. So perhaps we need to get the message out more, but I don't think that's really going to, I don't think we can sit here thinking that the competition and the choice isn't going to, be a challenge for us to really make sure that we have the right offer to meet the future's needs. So that's exactly this juggle that we're doing at the moment to make sure we continue to be strong in all of these ways and continue to deliver is a really, really important one.
Thank you. So we've got two questions on that side. If you further around, please. Yes, if you keep your hands up. Yeah, that's it. Lovely. Thank you.
Thanks. Hi, Charlotte.
Hi.
Tim Wilson. As you know, I'm a policy consultant.
Can you say who you are, sorry?
Tim Wilson. I work with Audio UK, which represents the independent
Hi,
sector. You mentioned, actually, the benefits of best creative ideas, and that's what you want, and you talked about working with the audio ecosystem. I realise you had to cover a lot in your speech, but you didn't mention that you're currently carrying out a review of speech audio production to see whether you should move some or all of it into BBC Studios. When obviously that happened in television, there was a corresponding opening up of BBC schedules to more competition from the independent sector, which again brought more ideas into the BBC, which benefited audiences. So my question is, if you move some or all of BBC's speech audio production into studios, therefore competing in the wider market with the independent sector, will you correspondingly open up more of your own schedules to competition for ideas from the independent sector?
Look, I can't speak about the detail of any of this yet. The review is ongoing. It's ongoing because it's a really carefully considered review where we have to really get this right and think about what's the right thing to do. We know that the podcast market has changed the face of the audio industry, and of course the independent sector is a big part of that, and there's been huge growth, which is very exciting creatively. So we will absolutely, any changes that we make there will absolutely be looked at in the WIGO ecosystem, because BBC Radio is such a core part of that. It's very important that we think about all of the consequences of any decision that was made. But I can't say anything here, and obviously the staff will be the first to hear of anything, but absolutely we will come and chat to you when we know.
Thank you. A question there. Thank you. Yep.
Hello, Charlotte. Anthony
Hi.
Wells, VLV trustee and former BBC radio producer. I'm glad to hear your commitment to schedules and live broadcasting, because personally, I'm getting a bit fed up with having BBC Sounds thrust down my throat at all times of the day and night. And it is having an effect. I mean, you mentioned the Barry Humphries repeats. It was a great series. What you didn't mention was that those repeats are being broadcast at midnight on Radio 2, and the originations were broadcast at midnight. And 2 weeks ago, there was a very interesting 5-part series about the coronation on BBC Radio 2. What time did it go out? 2:45 in the morning, 2:45 in the morning. Now, I think this is rather cynical, actually, and I do feel that schedules are actually on the way out. That's what it appears to me, because when you look at BBC Sounds, it's not just catch-up, it's a lot more. You've got podcasts which have never been broadcast on the radio, and you've got streaming stuff like wall-to-wall classical music, which is not a BBC concept in my view, and why is that suddenly appearing? And the other thing, the other problem I have with BBC Sounds is I can't get it in good technical quality. Can I hear it on my television set? I have no idea. I don't have a smartphone. I can't get it on my FM radio in the bathroom. So it has its limitations in terms of reach.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you. Yep.
No, right, and I look, and this is where a sort of value for all, because what we're doing is we are having to do that very delicate juggle of looking after audiences that don't have access, but also we're trying to help audiences make that journey to Sounds and to iPlayer, because there all our stations and our channels will be available. But that is the future, because we know that that is increasingly where more and more audiences are going. But it's a very difficult juggle, and you know we need to make sure that for audiences that don't want to consume on those on-demand platforms, that they still feel that they get value. So it's incredibly important, and all that feedback is constantly how we try and juggle, you know, the schedules. Schedules are still incredibly important. That's why we've kept all our channels. That's why we've kept our stations. As I say, they are incredibly important. And they're actually often opportunities to introduce people to content and then to help them make that journey online and to help them actually understand the choice that's there for them. So I realise it's not everybody wants that. My mother-in-law constantly writes to me every day to say much the same. And I'm trying to help her realise that actually there could be so much more for her if she's not happy with what we've got on offer. And that is part of, what we do.
Should you be doing more...
Jake, don't write that down. My mother-in-law will then go, I'm name-checking her.
She'll be in the Times.
Yeah, she'll be.
Love it.
She
Yeah,
probably,
she'll be in the
well, yeah,
Times.
she probably would, actually.
Should you be doing more to educate people to how to get it? I know we don't want any more trails, but explaining
do you know what?
to people
I think
how
you're
they
right.
get it. I think there's a huge assumption by those of us who know a bit about it, but not that much,
Yeah.
that everybody gets it.
Yeah, my
And
mother-in-law
they
doesn't
really
even
don't
want to have a
even know
telephone.
how to- yeah.
No, I think you're right. We do need to help people, and we do need to make sure that again, the money that we're putting into our digital services feels like that's value to everybody as well. So I absolutely take your point.
Thank you. Got a question over here.
Good morning. It's Gareth from the International Broadcasting Trust. Charlotte, thank you for your speech and for sharing your time with us. In 2019, when Sounds launched, we were told the BBC were working on a public service algorithm. Could you update us on that? Has that been deployed for Sounds?
Well,
And just more broadly, what are the BBC doing to make sure that audiences don't fall into content silos, into filter bubbles, that they're being exposed to a wide range of content?
So Storm Fagan, fantastically named head of product, is the most amazing woman, is absolutely in charge of the algorithm. And as we get more sophisticated, and we're doing a lot to change our product and to evolve our products in the next couple of years, you will see a lot of changes about what we mean by a public service algorithm. An algorithm is something, again, don't quote me on technical know-how because I would leave this to Storm, but an algorithm, you can program the algorithm to do what you want it to do. So you can the algorithm isn't sort of lowest or highest common denominator of what people want to watch. You can program the algorithm to offer up a variety. You can program and you can, the way you tag content, again, I'm slightly stepping into tech detail here, the way you tag content will then influence what comes up and whether you want, I hope we'll get to a point where you can say, I want all arts programming, I want to be, notified of any new foreign affairs programming that might come up. So there are all sorts of, a public service algorithm is absolutely what we're committed to do. And what we're trying to say by that is it won't just be on the front of all our products that you'll see the most watched. We will be serving up to you a much more personalised, but also what I would say a public service algorithm is a bit like our schedules where we lead you in, we then say, you don't know you want to watch this, but I think you need to, and here's something that will surprise you. And again, that mission to inform, educate and entertain, which genuinely I believe we do all of those three things in different measure, in different programmes, that will continue to inform how we choose what programmes we commission. And there's no point in me commissioning programmes if people don't watch them, so I will be offering up those programmes for people to watch. Whether it is, Once Upon a Time in Iraq, one of my favourite documentary series, we have Once Upon a Time in Northern Ireland coming up. I hope that will, speak to people, and then we'll be saying, if you enjoyed that, go and have a look and learn more about Once Upon a Time in Iraq, and we can take them back through the archive. It's amazing the journeys we'll be able to take people on that I think, that's what a public service algorithm can do.
Some people say, i.e. me, that when you look on the website, actually you don't find as much about the programmes as you used to find.
Do you know what? It's evolving. And again, the product work that we are doing to make sure, again, part of my job has been to think about this as the sum of the BBC's parts. It's not listeners and viewers as if they're different people. All of us listen and watch and consume online. We need to help those journeys, and everything that you watch and listen to, we need to learn from that to help surface these things. So you will, again, it's a lot of work, it's a lot of plumbing, as Storm would say, to do before we are as good as we want to be, but you will see that change a lot in the next couple of years.
That's great. We've got a question from Jake here in the middle.
Hi, Jake.
Jake Cantor, I'm a journalist. I work for Deadline. I just wanted to ask you something about the coronation, if I might, and something that struck me, particularly in the context of the BBC's very well-established commitment to impartiality. I thought it was noticeable that the BBC's main coverage did not mention the arrests of peaceful protesters. Some of your rivals did, ITV, Sky.
Our news coverage did.
Your news did.
Absolutely, which was woven into
the main coverage did not. I wonder whether you reflect on that as a bit of a mistake, given how big that story became after the event.
I think because we're a multimedia organisation, we were able to reflect the full story on all our different platforms in different ways. So I think we did reflect it, and I think that's what our BBC News service is absolutely there to do. And our events coverage is covering the ceremonial event and across the days, and of course in the lead up to the programme, from an impartiality point of view, we welcomed debate around the monarchy. We welcomed debate about the coronation, the past, the future. Again, that was absolutely part of our offer, and so should it be.
Thank you. Any more? If there are no more, yes, there's one final question here from...
Hello, Charlotte.
Hi.
I hear what you hear about...
Oh, Charlie.
Charles Runcie, from BBC. I hear what you say about, multiplicity of platforms. That really, how much longer are we going to have Radio 4 long wave? How much longer are we going to have 5 live or medium wave? Because in the long run, it's unsustainable. Listeners will just move away from it. And there comes a point when the audience becomes so tiny it's actually not worth doing. I listened across, I don't know why, I must have been not busy, across the whole of long wave last week in the car. We're the only ones left. Yeah. Ireland have gone off, France have all gone off. There's nothing apart from us. And I thought we were the world leaders. Well, I hear there's an audience, but it will become unsustainable at some stage, surely, to have all those lovely shipping forecasts and things. Because really, come on, we're in the 21st century here.
This is the moment to remember that the VLV is 40 years old and began as the Save Radio 4 long wave campaign under Jocelyn Hay.
But
so. That's the point. I'm just marking it.
But it's all about tipping points, isn't it? And it's all about, we look at the value. So we only will keep things if we feel that the value to the audience is still, because it's all about cost. If things don't cost very much to keep them for the few, then that's still important. There are lots of reasons. At the moment, when that tipping point does not become value to the licence fee payer, we have, I have no hesitation. But to be honest, we will be watching. You can look at trends. You don't want to...
I did. I just watched
Yeah.
the long wave.
Yeah. Listen, but you have to kind of look at the trend and you have to decide when is that tipping point, and those tipping points will come. And it is all about looking at the money we spend and the value they give to those audiences. And that is a numerical, data-led decision. But obviously, in this world of promising access to all, it's really important that we make sure that there are people who still feel they get that.
Thank you very much. We must let you get off to
Off I go to Eurovision. I tried to think today, how am I going to get dressed for the VLV and Eurovision? So obviously I've got
Have you
feather
you've
boa,
cracked it,
I've got...
obviously,
No,
yeah.
well, not really, but anyway. Very nice to see you. Thank you very much, Torrin.
Please round of applause, please. So thank you very much.